Once upon a time, in a vast and prosperous kingdom, there lived a mighty king whose rule stretched far and wide. His throne was built on fear, not love, and his orders were followed without question. The walls of his palace were made of marble, his court adorned with gold, and his army was among the strongest in the region. People called him powerful, but behind closed doors, they whispered another word: cruel. This king had been hardened by battles and betrayals. His heart knew no softness, and his pride knew no limits. He believed strength meant silence, control, and unquestioned loyalty. He didn't believe in mercy or emotion, only in power and legacy. Despite his harsh nature, the king had been blessed with 7 daughters. Each of them was a shining example of purity, intelligence, and grace. The eldest, Aliyah, was known for her wisdom, the second, Zainab, for her generosity. The third, Maryam, was deeply spiritual, while the fourth, Hafsa, was brave and spoke with clarity. The fifth, Ruqayya, was gentle with nature. The sixth, Khadijah, had a poetic heart. And the youngest, Fatima, was both innocent and deeply insightful. But the king never acknowledged their qualities. To him, daughters were burdens to protect, not blessings to cherish. He never allowed them into matters of the court. He never asked for their opinions. All he wanted was for them to remain silent and obedient. Servants in the palace often looked at the daughters with admiration. "They are like 7 stars in a dark night," one maid whispered. But the king, he only sees shadows. Despite living in a palace, the girls felt like prisoners. The king had forbidden them from stepping out without permission, from speaking in the court, or from studying matters of leadership or religion too deeply. He feared their wisdom, feared it would challenge his authority. But the daughters never rebelled. Instead, they turned to prayer. Every evening, they gathered in a quiet part of the palace and raised their hands to the heavens. They didn't ask for freedom. They asked for their father's heart to be softened by the mercy of Allah. Their patience was deep. Their faith was deeper. And though the king didn't know it yet, his greatest teachers were the very daughters he had overlooked. Each morning, just before dawn, the quiet halls of the palace would echo softly with the whispers of the 7 sisters. Wrapped in white shawls, their faces serene, they would sit together on prayer mats in the eastern courtyard where the first light of day touched the stones. They prayed not for wealth, nor for escape, but for guidance, for themselves and most importantly, for their father. "O Allah," Aliyah would whisper, "fill our father's heart with your light." "O our Rab," Zainab would say, "let truth enter his soul, and take pride away." "Give us strength, Ya Allah," Maryam would pray, "to bear what we must, and to change what we can, with love, not force." Though they were royal daughters, they lived with humility. Their days were spent reading the Qur'an, learning the seerah of the Prophet, memorizing the names of the Sahaba, and serving the poor quietly through the palace gates. They believed knowledge was not for show, it was for transformation. One afternoon, while seated near the old library, Fatima, youngest of the 7, closed her book slowly and looked at her sisters. "Our father believes power is in the sword," she said gently, "but we know power lies in saber, patience, and dua. We can't argue with him. We must teach him, with the beauty of what we know." The sisters nodded. A quiet plan was born in their hearts. They decided that each day, one of them would visit their father, not to challenge him, but to share a small lesson. Not as daughters who were seeking freedom, but as believers sharing truth with love. The next morning, it was Aliyah's turn. She entered the king's chamber respectfully and waited silently as he sat in silence. Then she said calmly, "Father, do you know why Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab used to sleep on the bare ground even as ruler of a vast empire? Because he feared Allah more than he loved his throne." The king frowned but said nothing. The next day, Zainab spoke to him about the Prophet's gentleness with children, and how he would stand when Fatima entered the room. "Even the greatest man," she said, "showed love and honor to his daughter." Bit by bit, day by day, the daughters continued, each one planting a seed in his heart. He didn't say much, but something in his eyes had begun to shift. The words echoed in his mind long after they left. The palace, once full of orders and shouting, began to feel softer. As if a quiet wind of change had begun to blow. Something was stirring, not just in the air, but inside the king himself. One cool evening, just after Maghrib, the sky above the palace glowed in shades of deep orange and purple. The torches in the courtyard were lit, and a gentle breeze moved through the trees. The king sat alone in his private balcony, looking out at the horizon. His heart, once firm like stone, now carried the weight of silence. The stories his daughters had been telling him, they wouldn't leave his mind. He remembered Zainab's words about the prophet kissing his daughter's forehead, and Fatima's reminder that no throne could protect a man from Allah's judgment. Something inside him stirred, not anger this time, but reflection. He didn't speak of it to anyone, not even his ministers, but deep down, he was troubled. As he sat lost in thought, a soft sound reached his ears, melodic, peaceful. He turned his head toward the palace courtyard. There, beneath the open sky, he saw his 7 daughters seated in a circle. Their heads bowed, their voices united in the recitation of Surah al-Rahman. "Which of the favors of your Lord will you deny?" The verse repeated again and again, like waves hitting the shore of his heart. For a moment, the king simply watched. He didn't interrupt. He didn't command. He just listened. The youngest, Fatima, was facing his direction. As the recitation ended, she stood up slowly and walked toward him, her steps calm and graceful. She reached the edge of the balcony, bowed her head in respect, and spoke softly. "Father, the Qur'an doesn't just warn. It heals. Allah's mercy is greater than his punishment, but for those who turn back before it's too late." The king looked at her. For the first time in years, his eyes held no command, only curiosity, and perhaps, shame. "And what do you think will happen to me?" he asked quietly. Fatima replied, "That depends, father, not on what you've done, but on what you choose now." The king said nothing, but that night, sleep escaped him. For hours he lay awake, his mind restless. He remembered the people he had punished unjustly, the servants he had shouted at, the times he had ignored his daughter's tears. All of it came back like a flood in the silence of night. Near dawn, he rose from bed. Slowly, as if his body carried years of burden, he walked to the palace library. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the Qur'an, a book that had gathered dust on his shelf for too long. He opened it, and for the first time in his life, he read not as a king, but as a man searching for truth. The sun rose slowly over the palace walls, casting golden light across the marble floors. Servants moved quietly, sensing a strange stillness in the air. Something had changed, something none of them could name, but all of them could feel. The king had not called for his usual court meeting. No soldiers stood at the gates in formation. No shouting echoed through the halls. Instead, the guards were surprised to see the king walking alone, without his robe of gold, without his crown. He wore a simple white garment, his face pale, his eyes sunken from a sleepless night. He entered the royal court and sat not on the throne, but on the steps below it. His ministers stood stunned, unsure whether to speak. For a long moment, silence hung in the room like a curtain. Then, slowly, he raised his gaze and said, "Last night, I met someone I had long ignored, my own soul." Whispers spread, eyes widened. He continued, his voice softer than ever before. "I ruled this land with pride, thinking I had all the answers. But it was my daughters, my 7 quiet flames, who held the light I had been blind to." The vizier stepped forward. "Your Majesty, what is it you ask of us?" "I ask," said the king, "that we rebuild this kingdom, not with fear, but with faith. Not with the whip, but with wisdom. From today, women will be given the right to speak, learn, and lead. Justice will be swift, but kind. No poor man shall leave our gate hungry. And I will begin again. As a servant before being a king." The court fell silent. Then, like sunlight breaking through clouds, tears appeared in the eyes of the elders. The younger guards bowed their heads. Even the servants watching from the balconies whispered, "Alhamdulillah." The king's first act was to publicly honor his daughters. He invited scholars, scribes, and townspeople into the palace courtyard. Before the entire kingdom, he stood beside them and said, "These are my daughters, not just my blood, but my teachers. They reminded me of Allah when I had forgotten. They showed me patience when I deserved anger. Their prayers became my salvation." He placed a hand on Fatima's head, then turned to the crowd. "From today, let them be known not as daughters of a king, but as lights of this land. Let every girl know, she is not a burden. She is a mercy. And so, the kingdom changed. Schools opened for girls, scholars, men and women, were invited to the palace. The king gave up his private treasures to build hospitals and shelters. The people, who once feared him, began to love him. He was no longer called the cruel king. He became known across lands as Badshah-e-Adil, the just king. As for his daughters, they were remembered for generations as the 7 lamps of light, a reminder that even the darkest hearts can be illuminated by the softest rays of truth and faith. And in every corner of the kingdom, whenever a father held his daughter's hand, he would whisper a silent prayer. Ya Allah, make her like them.